Welcome again. My name is Jessica Lorai, and I'm the program director at the Interfaith Center at Miami University. We're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to invite people from diverse secular, spiritual, and religious traditions to participate in one another's practices in order to cultivate appreciative understanding and friendship. We seek to unify people around common moral, social, and ethical concerns in order to build a more just and equitable society. So we have a series on our YouTube channel that's called the Faith Sharing Series, where we feature a specific religious or spiritual tradition. And we're going to be adding to that this evening with our program on Unitarian Universalism. And so we have two lifelong Unitarian Universalists with us this evening. Both of them live here in Oxford, Ohio. So first we'll be speaking Jennifer Blue, and she's, like I said, a lifelong Unitarian Universalist who came to Oxford to work at Miami University, where she's a professor of physics and currently an associate dean. She served Hopedale Unitarian Universalist community as treasurer, as an instructor of their faith-based sexuality education curriculum, and as chair of the Sunday Services Committee, planning programming in their lay-led congregation. We also have with us this evening Genevieve O'Malley Knight, who's a lifelong Unitarian Universalist and nearly a lifelong resident of Oxford, Ohio. She grew up in the local congregation, the Hopedale Unitarian Universalist community, and Genevieve attended the denomination's Midwest Leadership School for lay leaders and is a member of the Liberal Religious Educators Association. She has served Hopedale as Religious Education Coordinator since 2013. So let's welcome Jennifer, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks. I'm sorry that I have stripes on my face. I'm sure that will change throughout the evening as the sun moves. There we are. We're from the Hopedale Unitarian Universalist community, which is right down the hill on 27 on the left as you go out of Oxford. It's a lovely piece of property if you want to come and go for a walk in the field or in the woods. You're welcome. So we're going to talk a little bit about theology such as it is, go really quickly through our history, at least in this country, talk about how the denomination is organized, and then focus a little bit on our religious education and our social justice. And we're really trying to leave a lot of time for questions, answers, and discussion. Right now, I can't see the chat, but I know Genevieve can interrupt me if there's anything really urgent that comes up. So we do not have a creed. I say as I put words on the screen that kind of look like they might be a creed. We use the language that we affirm and promote these principles. So we like these, we talk about them a lot, we try to connect a lot of our worship and our social justice action to these. We are not entirely sure that all of this is happening right now. I don't believe there is always, for example, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, but I believe there ought to be, and we work towards making that more true. We talk a lot about, we speak of these with their numbers. So sometimes we say, just remember the first principle, remember the first principle, the way other people would just say the name of a Bible verse instead of having to say the whole verse. A lot of us know the first principle, which one that is, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. That helps a lot while you're making decisions about anything relating to other people. And we are very good, I think, also at remembering the seventh principle when we're thinking about things like climate change and acting in a more ecological and green way. I myself do not always remember what all the other principles are in order, although they all look familiar and feel true to me. And Genevieve will talk a little bit more about the organization and kind of the structure of our whole denomination. Sometimes you can tell that things were done by large committees of people, and these were written by large committees of people in a democratic process. And it took years to come to some kind of consensus on these. And right now we're in a multi-year process as a national denomination about discussing whether we're going to add an eighth principle. The tentative wording for that is kind of long, but we're talking about adding a principle that really says it's one of the main goals of our religious communities will be building diverse multicultural communities that are accountably dismantling racism and other oppressions. Our denomination is a fairly upper class white denomination at this time, and we're pretty self-conscious about that. And we have organizations within our organizations of Black Lives UU. I mean, with my last name Blue, I've got 11 organizations whose name is Blue, BLUU. And there's definitely people working within our organization to try to journey towards spiritual wholeness in this way. So this is as close as we really have to a theology, is that we affirm and promote these principles. We work towards this together, realizing that we are humans and that we are fallible. And we also affirm and promote these sources. So there's a lot of people in our congregations who have come from one of the religions of the book, or the Abrahamic religions, who came from a Talmud or a Torah or a Bible or a Quran. And we do take these sources. It is probably not coincidental that that is number 4 on a list of 6, but we do take the Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. That is one of the main sources of wisdom that we have. We really start with our direct experience of the transcending mystery and wonder. So a lot of us have had some direct experience of something that may or may not be called divine, and we trust that. And we think that is a source of religious and spiritual wisdom. We also quote all sorts of prophetic people. And we don't have rules about what we can read and who we can quote from our pulpits. And I've worked with university chapels and things like that, so I know that that's not always the case. But we could read wisdom from any of the world's religions in our congregation. Usually on Christmas Eve, Genevieve reads How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and I read The Night Before Christmas. And somebody reads from Luke. So we do that all together in the same service, and it doesn't seem like a contradiction to ourselves. I have quoted Miss Manners from the pulpit when it was important for my service that I was leading. So we do look at religion from all the world's religions. We have, this will come up a little bit in our history also, we have humanist teachings. I remember from the 80s, the phrase secular humanism was thrown around a lot. And some of us are quite guilty of being secular humanists. We really believe in the potential of people and reason and conscience. And that's one of the things that universalism means, is that we really believe in people. And we do also believe, I know you in your series have already talked about pagans. There are definitely pagan Unitarian Universalists and others who maybe don't identify exactly as pagans, but really believe that earth-centered traditions and the rhythms of nature also have something to teach us. So we affirm and promote all of these sources. And one of the things that Genevieve and I have done in our own congregation is a new to UU active class. And this is one of the activities that we do. This is one where people who are able can get up on their feet and literally move as sort of a continuum. And so after we practice with something like, do you like vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream more? You know, something that is less fraught than just, but then question 2 is, do you believe in God? And if you really believe, yes, of course there is a God, you move to one side of the sanctuary. And if you really believe, nope, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool atheist, there is no God, of course there's not a God, how could anyone believe in a God? You move to the other end of the sanctuary, and some people end up on a continuum of spaces in between. And so there is no requirement to believe in God or to not believe in God. We are full of agnosticism in our denomination. I think in our little congregation, there are certainly agnostics and there's certainly theists, and there's a bunch of people who don't know and a bunch of people who change their mind from depending on their current experiences of the world. So there's no requirement to believe any of these things, but one of the things we believe in is the right to ask the questions and discuss the answers and really think about, what do we believe? Why do we believe it? How do we know what we know? And some of it is faith. Some things we know just because we know them and we don't really have good rational arguments for them. And some things we know because we have direct experience. So we talk about things like, is life, do we have free will? Do we have fate? Are people more physical or spiritual? I think the last time I asked people in a group these questions right in a row, they kind of nudged them together and started talking about mind and body and neurons and why do we do things? And what is goodness? For some of these, the last 3 that I put up here, we go to 4 different corners of a room. Is goodness happiness? Is goodness justice? Is goodness holiness? Or something else? And it's fun to just decide, what do you think goodness is? What do you value the most? Truth, beauty, goodness, or something else? What happens after you die? There's no one Unitarian Universalist answer to that question. Some people believe in reincarnation. Some people believe in a very traditional view of heaven. Some people believe in a less traditional view of heaven, sort of a grand union with the universe. Some people think, well, you die and then you get buried or cremated or something, and then you are gone. So we do not require we never recite a creed. We don't require any beliefs. We have a large diversity of beliefs in even a small group of people. But we like talking about what we believe and what we don't believe and how things are changing very much. We're kind of obsessed with not knowing what we believe in a way that I find kind of stimulating and engaging and fun. And we do have some shared values. I'm going to try to be really techie and switch. Can you see that it's about to be a video? Yep, okay, good. This is a 3.25-minute video.
We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people of many paths who are brave, curious, and compassionate thinkers and doers. Every day, people are inundated with information, overwhelmed by demands, and pulled by a culture that seeks to divide us from the web of life. Unitarian Universalism reconnects, bringing people together with meaning and inspiration. We are a house without walls, a congregation without spiritual limits, and a movement that calls you to put more faith in yourself, your community, and your beliefs. We are a faith that honors your mind, your heart, your journey. Simply put, we are a guided path towards a better you and a better world. Grounded in hundreds of years of thoughtful religious communities, we are people of many generations, ethnicities, genders and sexualities, and spiritual backgrounds. People engaged in making the world a better place. People focusing on what really matters: love, justice, integrity, and hope. Unitarian Universalists have different beliefs, but shared values. We are Unitarian Universalists, and at the same time, we may also be agnostic, Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, humanist, Jewish, Muslim, pagan, atheist, believers in God, and those who let the great mystery be. The diversity of beliefs you'll find in a Unitarian Universalist community is one of our strengths. We're always learning how to see the world from a different perspective. What unites us are our core principles that uphold 7 real-world values: believing in the worthiness of every person, showing compassion and fairness, accepting others for who they are, growing through a personal search for truth, leading with democratic spirit, working for justice, and understanding that everything is interconnected. 7 days a week, Unitarian Universalists live these principles by doing. When we gather, we worship, reflect, and remind ourselves what matters most in life. Whatever our age, we learn to live with more wisdom, more awareness, more gratitude, and more soul. We show our values by showing up to answer the call for social justice. We have a track record of siding with love for civil rights, LGBTQ equality, immigration reform, environmental sustainability, reproductive justice, racial justice, and more. Find what it means to live your deepest values out loud. Join us on this extraordinary adventure of faith.
That is a good reminder. Let me make sure I'm not about to play 15 other videos. That is a good reminder that a lot of what Genevieve and I put in this PowerPoint, we got from that website, uua.org. And so if you're a multitasker, you could go there now. It's not that hard to find, uua.org for the Unitarian Universalist Association. And I can do a really brief history, I think. You may have, they whizzed by really fast. There was a little pilgrim hat in one of those little cartoons in the video. We were here with the early church controversy splitting off from kind of the fundamentalist pilgrim-like religions in the very beginning of this country. And there's still a lot of places, I think, in New England where there's a Unitarian Universalist church and a Congregationalist church right near each other, because we kind of broke off from them. So we had a big controversy, and you can tell a little bit about the heresies that we started at, really. We started as a couple of different heresies from Christianity, and you can kind of guess what they were from the words Unitarian and Universalism. The Unitarians read their Bibles very carefully and did not really see that there was a Trinity. They did not think that Jesus was the Son of God any more than all people are the children of God. So mostly they were people who did believe in one God, but they didn't really do the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit Trinitarian thing. They just couldn't really see that in their close textual reading of their Bibles. And that was, of course, a huge problem for the Christian churches that they were in large part. So there was Unitarian controversies, and Unitarians were splitting away from their Trinitarian congregations centuries ago. Then there were also Universalists who came to this country in our early days. And Universalists were people who also at the time were theists and believed in an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving God. And they could not understand why there would be hell. So they believed in universal salvation. They did not believe in original sin. I mean, a lot of us lifelong Unitarian Universalists have not, for example, been baptized because it's not necessary in our religion to get baptized because we are born good, just as we are. And those of us who believe in a God usually believe in a loving God who could, at the point of death, explain all, forgive all, make us better people than we were, and give us our salvation. So all will be forgiven. And so that also did not go well with sort of the Jonathan Edwards, Sinners of an Angry God kind of early American religion. So that's a different kind of heresy. So there was one religion that was Unitarianism, one that was Universalism. And then we all kind of met up with the Transcendentalist movement, with sort of Ralph Waldo Emerson is somebody that we quote a lot. People who were having their own direct experience of nature and wonder and awe, and people in the late 19th century were getting together and from multiple different religions, including some liberal Jews and some progressive Quakers and other people talking about a free religious association with some of the same goals. When I look them up, I see some of the same words that are in our 7 principles. They believed people all had worth. They believed we should try to figure things out. There's a kind of a growing movement among several different more liberal religions to think there were ways to be more like Unitarian Universalists are today. And of course, the humanist movement, John Dewey and other people were starting in the United States in the early 20th century. Again, there are a bunch of secular humanists in our Unitarian and Universalist traditions. And the 2 religions merged together in 1961. We're now the same people. There are, if you can tell sometimes the history of congregations. I grew up in a church that was called a Unitarian church because it was from before 1961, and it took a couple of congregational votes to change its name, and it's now a Unitarian Universalist church. I've been guests in other churches that were Universalist churches before the merger, and you can kind of tell a little bit. The stereotypes that we have about ourselves is that the Unitarians were a little more sort of text-based people from Pilgrim times who kind of sat around in New England reading their Bibles and discussing the Holy Trinity. And the Universalists were more like big, friendly groups of Southern people who just took everyone in and made everybody feel welcome. Neither of those things is 100% true, but this is kind of the internal stereotypes that we have. And sometimes you can tell from the quality of the church or the architecture of the church or just the name of the church, which came first for that group of people. Our own congregation in Oxford was founded after all that. So we have been Unitarian Universalist right from the start. And the last thing I'll talk about is our kind of religion-long effort to build a beloved community. We have been working for what we now, a lot of churches in Oxford would now call social justice, a lot of faith communities, I should say, that Universalists and Unitarians there were many active abolitionists from both of those movements. We were the first religious body to ordain a woman, late 19th century, but we did that. And we've been championing progressive education for our children. We have been working for racial justice, again, from a position mostly of white privilege, but being active with the NAACP, marching with Dr. King, being very active and proud of these traditions. And we have been actively supporting LGBTQ rights. Maybe the T wasn't there in 1970, but we've been actively supporting rights for queer people since the 60s, passed that resolution in the 70s after much discussion, and have supported equal marriage early and often. So I will turn this over to Genevieve. Whoops, if I can there.
All right, so I'll do a little bit about our organization, and then sort of about our main focuses, sort of like what do we do in our religious communities. So for the first thing to know about the organization of and the institutions of Unitarian Universalism is that we have congregational polity. The decision-making powers all lie with the congregations. Using the democratic process is one of our core values, and each covenanted group of Unitarian Universalists is expected to democratically govern itself. Whether or how to own property, hire staff, call a minister, ordain a minister, how to relate to other Unitarian Universalist groups, what are the requirements of membership, all of that is decided in the local congregation and cannot be imposed from outside of it. Usually we elect governing boards from among the members, we have committees to do the daily work, and all congregation meetings once or several times a year to make the big decisions, set the vision, set the budget. Our national organization is the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, which we abbreviate as the UUA. There's a Canadian association as well. There are partner associations around the world. The UUA is headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts. And we have an annual General Assembly we call GA, which is formed of delegates from all of the member congregations. So Jennifer touched on this. We have many different names because we each get to name ourselves. We have many different names for churches, congregations, communities, fellowship. Fellowship usually means a specifically smaller group that's specifically lay-led. Not all the lay-led groups call themselves fellowships. There are also covenanting communities, which might not look anything like a traditional congregation. It might be a campus ministry. It might be an intentional living community. But we generally use congregations as the shorthand for the local group. In the Cincinnati area, our Council of UU churches has 6 different groups and 4 different ways we form our names. There's a Universalist Unitarian church. There are Unitarian Universalist churches, Unitarian Universalist communities. There's one that's just Unitarian church. And then the Gathering at Northern Hills just avoids the issue. So there are more than 1,000 of these groups in the UUA, and we all get delegates to the General Assembly. It's the business meeting. When you say the UUA does something, it usually does it through a General Assembly if it's a big decision. The Assembly elects the leaders of the UUA. We have a president, a moderator, board of trustees. The association's mission: to equip congregations for vital ministry, to support and train leaders, both lay and professional, and to advance Unitarian Universalist values in the world. So the main things we do through our national organization, we train our ministers. It's the individual congregations that ordain ministers. It can be anyone. Generally, it is only people who have gone through the fellowshipping process in the ministerial fellowship committee of the UUA. To be a Unitarian Universalist minister, you have to have a Master's of Divinity. You have to have had clinical pastoral education, gone through an internship ministry, and review by this committee. The UUA also publishes books. Education is a big deal. We have 2 imprints. We have Skinner House books, which is mostly books about Unitarian Universalism for Unitarian Universalists. I use a lot of them for my religious education work. So Faithful Practices. I have a whole pile of Skinner House books. There's also Beacon Press, which is our more outward facing publishing house. It's the publisher of the Pentagon Papers in book form. Cornell West is one of our authors, Mary Oliver. There's recently been an agreement with the estate of Reverend Dr. King to publish or republish all of his works through Beacon Press. The UUA also provides lots of religious education curricula, lots of shared services. There's so many online resources that individual leaders, often lay leaders in small congregations, we don't have to wait for divine inspiration. We don't have to have that every week. We can pull some resources that we pool at the UUA that really enhance the offerings that each congregation can give. And I'll jump down just a little bit here to mention the Church of the Larger Fellowship is our largest congregation. It's an online church, more than 3,500 members, and it's been a church at a distance since well before there was such a thing as online, to serve Unitarian Universalists who, for whatever reason, can't be in a brick and mortar church. They have a prison ministry. They serve a lot of people who are incarcerated at the Church of the Larger Fellowship, and a lot of professional, like religious professionals. It can be hard to have your employer also be your spiritual home. So a lot of religious professionals will have their personal membership in the Church of the Larger Fellowship while they're being serving as a congregation. The other things the UUA does is help us coordinate our social justice activities. I'm going to talk about those in more detail in a minute. The organization is divided into regions. Our little sliver of Ohio is in the Mid-America region with most of the Plains states. And so there's regional staff at the UUA who are sort of our first point of contact. And the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee is sort of the head organization organizing our social justice activities. And we have independent professional associations for sort of the 5 categories of religious professionals. Ministers, Jessica introduced me as a member of LREDA, Liberal Religious Educators Association. LREDA is my professional organization. Musicians, church administrators, and membership professionals. So we'll go on to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about what do we do. So we are a religious community. We worship together, usually on Sunday mornings. There's sort of a culture. Every group has a, this is the way we've always done it. But it's very different from one group to a next. And when we have people come to visit us at Hopedale, we say, come visit at least 3 times because you'll come to 3 entirely different experiences. It might be a drum circle one day. It might be a traditional hymn sandwich where there's a hymn and then the sermon and readings and then another hymn. So we do that. And then outside of worship services, our energy mainly goes towards we seek to learn, to teach each other, and to grow. So under the religious education umbrella, and then we seek to build the beloved community. We seek to live our values in the world. So I'll talk first about religious education because it's my job. We don't really use the phrase Sunday school. It's not just for kids. It's not just for Sunday. We tend to talk about it as lifespan faith formation. How can we help form? How can we help inform our members' faiths across their whole lifespan? So I have some words here from the 3 of the principles. To fully affirm our principles really requires us to seek to be educated. And our approach to religious education is largely based in liberal education theories. We want to teach how to ask questions, how to approach the big questions. Many or most of our curricula are narrative-based, story-based. They include skits to put on and games to play. It's an experiential learning format. Curricula are developed for specific age groups and also for specifically multi-generational groups. Often in LREDA, we will say that everything a congregation does is a form of faith formation. And the goal of our faith formation isn't to be able to recite certain things or know the number of all the principles. It's to prepare our people for what they'll face in our lives. How does your faith help you understand the world and your life events? We want our children and each other to be ready for the challenges of being human, to already have the stories and the structures that they'll need to draw on when the need comes. And one of our particular curriculums is Our Whole Lives, which Jennifer is a trained educator of. Our Whole Lives is our faith-based sexuality education. And we have modules of that for ages across the lifespan, as it's, where it's appropriate to teach different things. I hope we can get to that more in the questions, because I know Jennifer will want to talk about that. But I want to go on to talk about social justice and how we work to build the beloved community. So the short, cute phrase is that Unitarian Universalists are about deeds, not creeds. So we focus a lot of our energy on living our values to improve the world. The first 2 points on this slide are association-wide programs that congregations can join, and Hopedale is in both of these programs. Welcoming congregation is for groups that want to take intentional steps to be more welcoming and inclusive of people of all sexual orientations and all gender identities. And it's a never-ending commitment. This is a certification that has to be annually renewed. And of our 1,000 congregations, more than 800 of them are welcoming congregations. And the Green Sanctuary program began in 1989 as a path for congregational study, reflection, and action in response to environmental challenges. We're now in the 7th iteration of it, which is called Mobilizing for Climate Justice, a roadmap for congregations to rise to the crisis. Hopedale became an accredited Green Sanctuary in 2007, and this too is ongoing work. The Unitarian Universalist Ministry for Earth is the parent group of Green Sanctuary, and it has an understanding that climate justice is a moral imperative. And the Ministry for Earth organizes many activist circles, ongoing campaigns. One of them includes the support the UU groups give to the indigenous water protectors, particularly trying to stop the Line 3 tar sands pipeline. Another of our wide umbrella groups is Side with Love. This is a UU-sponsored public advocacy campaign that seeks to harness love's power to stop oppression. This was founded in response to a shooting in 2008 in the Tennessee Valley Unitarian Universalist Church in Knoxville, which was targeted for a shooting because they were welcoming to LGBTQ people and because they have a liberal stance on many issues. And Hopedale feels a particular tie to this organization because the minister at Tennessee Valley, Chris Bice, was our student minister. He did his student ministry in our congregation, and we ordained Chris Bice. So UU the Vote was imagined as an all hands on deck project to articulate UU values in the public square and activate and organize Unitarian Universalists on a mass scale. So to promote our value of the democratic process in the 2020 election cycle, we contacted over 3 million voters in our Get Out the Vote efforts. And we continue to work to, campaign continues to combat voter suppression, to mobilize voters, register voters, and have important values-based conversations about issues. Immigration justice is another moral issue for Unitarian Universalists. We advocate and organize for immigration reform, for an end to detentions and deportations, and many of our churches in the Southwest provide sanctuary homes for people. And the final point that I'll mention before we open for questions is the recognition that white supremacy, the idea that white people are better and more worthy than people of color, is a system that pervades all of our culture, all of our institutions, all of our relationships. And Unitarian Universalists recognize that we have to actively dismantle these systems. Otherwise, it's self-perpetuating. So that all of us have personal work to do, work in our congregations, in our other institutions. In spring of 2018, there was an association-wide teach-in about this, led by religious educators of color, and we continue to focus our UUA resources to expose the impact of white supremacy, to engage in study and change, and to enter partnerships for action. And that format is sort of how we approach a lot of our social justice things. Recognize, expose it, recognize it, engage in study and change, and then enter partnerships to produce some action. So these are a selection of some of the important ways that Unitarian Universalists live our values and promote the principles in the world. So with that, we'll move into questions that we hope you have. And of course, you can email us later if you think of things later, or the UUA website really is extensive and has many resources.
I see we have a hand raised already.
Yeah.
Jessica, are you moderating?
We can just kind of free
We
flow
don't need
here.
moderating. It's not a huge group.
Chaim has his hand up. You can unmute yourself, please.
Okay. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, very sorry. I fell asleep. So I received half the information, but I'm using my phone to get, like, you know, a super, you know, what do you call it? Coagulated information about Unitarianism. I know very little about it, but what I've read, it's not very much dissimilar to Judaism. I'm a Jewish, born a Jew, but now more into like the spirituality, I guess you'd call it, an awakened state, whatever you want to call it. But I love the fact that, you know, you don't consider Jesus the son of God, the uncle, you know, relative concepts. The absolute father, I guess, is you do believe that, right? Or you attest to that fact that there is a father head? No.
It depends who you ask, I guess. So some people in our religion believe in God and some people do not. Some people believe that Jesus was a real person and some people do not. Some people believe that Jesus was a prophet and some people do not. So we are, and we are not incompatible. I'm not sure we stressed enough what a high percentage of our congregants are converts. We have a lot of people. I think the traditional way to become a Unitarian Universalist a generation or so ago was to marry outside your faith and realize that your own parents' church would not perform the wedding. And then a Unitarian minister would step in and say, you're welcome here, you know, or be gay and not be allowed to marry who you loved. And then a Unitarian minister would step in and say, you are welcome here. And we definitely have Unitarian Universalist Jews who have not given up any of their Jewish practices or beliefs. I grew up close to Washington, D.C. My congregation very much stressed Passover because of the number of people in it who had grown up with those traditions and did not want to leave them. You know, so our congregation in Oxford doesn't treat Passover as a huge deal, but we will often have kind of a Yom Kippur service when it feels like that is an appropriate thing to do with the rhythm of the year. So we do not ask people to change their beliefs when they join our congregation.
Thank you.
And in some larger cities where there are more than one, you know, Unitarian Universalist congregation, one of them will sort of be the culturally Jewish Unitarian Universalist congregation, and one of them will be we emphasize more humanist teachings, and one of them will be the pagan congregation where you can go on May Day and have a maypole for sure. And that quite a broad diversity there.
You sound almost like a smorgasbord, you know, you don't like this, you pick this. And, you know, I don't know. It's good. It's super liberal. I mean, obviously open, you know, flexible, love those qualities. I'm just, you know, for somebody who may be a little lost and needs direction, I tend to feel there's maybe a little too much flexibility. You know, they need, you know, to hold on to a tree in the wind that won't break, but you know, will sway. And you sound that way, which is good, but some people need a firm, you know, grasp on certain things. You know, I'm with you guys in the sense of liberalism and flexibility and inclusiveness. God, inclusiveness. Boy, you know, I'm going to end it here. The name. Me. Enemy. Did you hear it? Name. The name is an enemy because we use it in you know, as a form of identity. I forget the word I'm trying to find, but it's an enemy because it divides, doesn't it? It's not inclusive, and that's the issue with all religions, but not. You guys seem to be different on that level, and I love that. So, yeah.
If you missed the beginning, then you missed our principles, which I just pasted back into the chat, and we can send our stuff over to Jessica for sure.
Okay.
We have been accused both positively and negatively as being a complete smorgasbord of people who don't stand for anything. Some people say, hooray, that's wonderful. And some people say, you don't stand for anything. And we've been having our arguments in several congregations, and I don't know about the whole association, Genevieve might know, about whether that's what we are or whether we should be standing for something. I agree. And there probably are people who would not feel welcome in our congregation, you know, and we want to be welcoming to all people, but then it's sort of, except for the people who don't believe that you should be welcoming to all people. So it ends up being rhetorically quite difficult to articulate. Maybe Genevieve can do better with that, but I know other people are raising their hands too.
Well, because it's covenant based, it's agreement based. If your behavior goes outside the covenant, you know, we are covenanting to affirm and promote these principles, and each congregation will have its own covenant of what we're going to do here. We are this group because we agree to be this group. And if your behavior goes outside that covenant, then there's a process for, hey, are you coming back or are you leaving? You know, that to be in the group, you need to be in the covenant and to be in right relations with the group. So usually there'll be a covenant that sort of forms the group and a covenant of right relations of how we behave together in the group.
Great, thank you. It looks like we have a question. I don't think that's Cecilia.
No, this is Andy. Yeah.
Okay, go right ahead, Andy.
I'm interested. You've just touched on what I was wondering about the processes by which you explore and discern both the actions that you're going to take and your sense of what's going on in the world that you need to respond to. In some ways, what you've described overlaps with our experience as Quakers, which is very process-based also, because we refer things not to creeds or scriptures as much as to processes that we use to try to discern truth and good action. And I wonder if you could say what your processes are like. I mean, be as concrete as possible, what you actually do when you want to know what is going on and what do we do about it?
You take that one, Genevieve.
Usually there are, we have so many committees that there'll be a committee for that someplace. So at the General Assembly, the Commission on Social Justice will bring forth some issues and say, these are the issues this year. General Assembly, what do you say about this? You are the delegate of our congregations. Vote on which of these. We'll have, you know, a workshop and we'll talk about these things. And then which one of these things are we going to make a statement about. There are actions of immediate witness. So like the pipeline's coming through and we have to protect, support the water protectors, or, we have to support the Black Lives Matter movement. Whatever the pressing issue is that year has a accelerated process so that the General Assembly can say something right now. And then that's phrased as the General Assembly in 2020 said this, and our actions of immediate witness are this. Take it back to your congregations. Congregations, here's the list of things to do about this action in the world. When it's not a pressing issue, but a longer term, like a lot of the green sanctuary, a lot of the climate justice issues have risen through, it's called congregational study action. And we choose an issue that then we as an entire association study for several years. We identify the issue, we study it, we figure out what to do, form new partnerships, and put forth our energy for change into some of these directions.
Thank you, that's helpful.
And it looks like Greg had a question in the chat and has his hand up if you would like to ask that question, Greg.
Oh, it's pretty much just what I wrote in the chat. I was just wondering whether what might be called new physics has influenced the Unitarian Universalists, things like Fritjof Capra's book on the Tao of Physics, or other similar books, or parapsychological research, or what's perhaps known as the fine-tuned universe. Anything that either of you might know about those?
I'm going to look at the physics professor.
Yeah, yes, I am a physics professor, which is not going to help me at all, I think, in this answer. But I would say for some people, it probably has. I'm not sure that it has affected our principles necessarily. A lot of our sources of wisdom that the first source of wisdom that we directly promote and affirm is our own direct experience of transcending mystery and wonder. And I think that's how a lot of people see this kind of new physics and a lot of parapsychological things. I know I've talked to people who are deeply Unitarian Universalist and have deep and personal experiences with ghosts and other things that I would not necessarily believe in as a scientist, but they have experienced it and they believe it, and it is part of their theology, and it does not bother me to be in a congregation with them, just as it does not bother them to be in a congregation with me, even though sometimes we disagree about the realness of that, but it's hard to argue with someone's direct experience. I would not dare to do that. I don't know if that was a satisfying answer, Greg.
Yeah, well, yeah, I figured it'd be kind of difficult because these are a little bit out in the fringe, so that's okay.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, when I was reading up on the history again for today, one thing that did come up in a couple different places was, and this is older science, but Darwin really was very influential on early Unitarian Universalists. Sometimes we claim him as one of our own and say he was a Unitarian Universalist, but the change in worldview that came with the adoption of Darwin's theories influenced the religion pretty hard, I think, in the early days. So we do go back and forth between science and religion. Some of you on the call have known me for a long time and know that I couldn't decide whether to major in religion or physics in college because I just wanted to know some answers, and they both seemed like good majors for figuring out how things worked. Physics at the time had more definitive answers than religion did, but I thought I was going to be a minister. but I still get to preach as a physics professor because we got no minister.
Chuck? Did you have a question, Chuck? You can feel free to unmute and ask.
Demographically, the Unitarians have been about 95% white. You might even describe them as a Mensa group with social justice concerns. Almost all are, university graduates, fairly upper middle class generally, mainly because of the educational level. Do you see the current changes within the UUA to try to get more people of color and people with different socioeconomic background to be members? Most churches are losing members because of the nuns, but do you see Unitarian Universalism to be different, let's say demographically, 5 or 10 years down the line?
We kind of hope for that. And there are definitely people who hope we can capture some of those nuns just because of the plus of being kind of a liberal smorgasbordy religion. You don't have to believe in God to come and worship with us and work with us and be in community with us. Genevieve, you might know more about, you've been to UUA more. So
I've been one of our delegates to the General Assembly almost every year since 2013, I think. And that's, we see that and we recognize that really as a shortcoming of our group, of our culture. That just for historic reasons, this is who's here, and it doesn't have to be. And we have, we think we have a good word to spread, and we're not evangelical. We won't come and knock on doors, so that becomes sort of uncomfortable for most of us. But the message that you're worthy, you are a worthy person right now as you are, is really helpful to a whole lot of people. And if we can sort of get over some of our this is how we've always done it cultural sticking points, it is only to the benefit of everybody. Who's already in the, we really believe that the diversity makes us stronger, and then we can help more people because we have more ideas on how to approach things. So
thank you. And for those who may be watching rather than in the actual Zoom meeting here, the question was asked in the chat, what are nuns? And did we mean nuns like N-U-N-S? And the answer is nuns is a reference to people who check the box none on surveys that ask what their religion is. So that's what we're referring to. And some of them often identify nowadays as spiritual, but not religious. So there's this category out there, and that's what was being referenced.
A lot of young people in this country identify themselves as spiritual and not religious, and they're not churchgoers, but they may have their own spiritual beliefs. And sometimes in reaction to that, I identify myself as religious, but not spiritual. Because I am certainly a church lady, and I do lots of church work and go to church every Sunday. And then I get confused about what my own spiritual beliefs are from day to day. Becky asked in the tricky question in the chat. Do you want me to just read that?
Sure, yeah.
Asking, I believe, this is Becky's words, I believe we are all born good. What do Unitarian Universalists teach about our individual brokenness and the presence of human evil? And I would say the Universalist part of Unitarian Universalists is the universal, came from our long held belief in universal salvation, that we are all born good, and we don't practice baptism as in general. I'm sure there's some congregations that do, because congregations all make their own decisions. We often shy away from talk of sin or evil. We talk about falling short of our values and not being the best versions of ourselves and making mistakes. And I have we do believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And I have talked to people who have experienced amazing tragedy at the hands of people who were then, convicted of crimes against them. And they said, well, we believe in that person's, that convicted felon's inherent worth and dignity. That doesn't mean we want to love them as we could love them abstractly as our neighbor, the way you read in inspirational Reader's Digest stories, maybe, but saying that that person has inherent worth and dignity would maybe mean they're entitled to due process and a fair trial, rather than say shooting in the street. You don't shoot the criminals down in the street, but you don't have to have them to dinner either.
And Jennifer talked about the early America, the split of Unitarians and how we sort of got the name Unitarian to distinguish from Trinitarian. And that was one of the splits, but it was also, that wasn't the important split in the Unitarians' perspective. It was more of the this original sin thing is not where it's at. This is not that people are basically fundamentally good. And, there is suffering that is unavoidable in the human condition. And there is suffering we can try to avoid and get rid of because, by struggling for justice. And I'm sort of bleeding over into the theology of suffering. Like there's a theology of, well, it didn't kill you, it made you stronger, and so that was good. And it's like, no, there is that is often the theology of an oppressor, and that needs to just get thrown out the window.
I mean, I think, we were just talking about how our whole denomination has work to do with our own demographics and how welcoming we are to all people. So I think we can look at that at sort of a denominational level and a congregational level and a individual level. Like we know we can do better, but we think we're good people and we think people are good. And, when way back in high school, I was having an argument with someone of another faith. And I said, well, I don't have any faith. I'm a very practical person. You could tell I was going to be a physics professor when I grew up. And they said, no, you have a faith that people are good. And I think that's as closest I get to a faith that I just believe sometimes against the face of evidence. Sometimes people are not good to me in individual moments in time, but I still have the faith from my religion that people are good. We can do better.
Great. We are right at our stopping time. Does anyone have any last questions? We'll take one more if you've got it. Ryan?
Yeah, I just, to both of you, Jennifer and Genevieve, it has nothing to do with Judaism, more in fact towards Buddhism, the idea of being unconscious, being sleeping, and ignorant. I call a lot of people ignorant, but not intellectually. They probably have an IQ, way out the charts, but spiritually ignorant, ignoring the darkness, the limitations. And to me, that is, in a sense, is it not in agreement, I would think, of you guys, you people, you women, ignoring the truth of clarity, of light, of whatever metaphor you want to use, but the light of clarity of God, forget God, being, whatever name, doesn't matter, but the clarity, the idea that they're ignorant. I'm sorry, you just you did the wrong thing, wrong, right, and different. You're not with the program. You took a gun, you shot somebody. That's not. You're sleeping, man. You're sleeping. You're sleeping.
A horrible mistake, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. People make horrible mistakes. They do horrible things sometimes, and they ought not. But
I have a message here that Becky has a question. Becky? Oh, you're muted.
I just wanted to say that I was a teacher at a Catholic school, and I had a student who was a member of your church, and she was the most enthusiastic person I've ever met in my entire life. And I was just wondering if you could comment on, she was a part of, I don't know, maybe I should have caught this in your presentation, but whatever the leadership is, like maybe a committee, I don't know, but she seemed like she was way high up in participation. She was elected, and we were all really proud of her because she was very outspoken about social justice, and she contributed a lot to our conversations.
I'm glad you had that experience. I mean, in our congregation, as well as the one where I grew up, so that's 2 out of thousands, but you could become a member of the congregation at age 16 and, sign the membership book and then start voting and get on the board and start chairing committees. If that's what you want to do, you can be on the board right there as a young person. And when we listen, and I was trying to remember when Genevieve was talking about General Assembly a couple years ago, there was a huge issue that was brought by teenagers who were delegates to the General Assembly and working themselves. And then in open meeting, they raised their hand and they said, we, the people who are between the ages of 16 and 25, have something important to say. And everybody listened to them and changed policy because they were right. So we have I'm hoping that we have a continuing tradition of valuing our youth. And I think they're really helping us be on what I see to be the right side of, issues with gender queer and trans people. I think people who are 20 are much better at this than people who are my age, to generalize, and we try to listen to the people who are coming up. So I'm glad you had that good experience.
And there's a we term it youth for like high school age kids. If you're like 14 or the equivalent of 9th grade, but not yet an adult, that's youth. And there's always a youth caucus at General Assembly, and they do their own thing, and they caucus and they determine what their issues are and where they stand on the things before General Assembly that year. And usually they're led around by a giant inflatable palm tree, and they move in a herd and come to the procedural microphone with here's what we're telling you now from the youth. And there's also a young adult caucus. So once you bridge over to adulthood, which is one of the rituals we recognize is bridging to adulthood, until 30, 35, that's young adult. And so there's young adult ministry too, and young adult caucus. And I think every time the General Assembly has not voted with the youth caucus, we've then decided, wait, that wasn't what we should have done in a future year. And it was the youth caucus that got Green Sanctuary to happen, the program of Green Sanctuary. They came with, here are our issues, and the Green Sanctuary was proposed, the board, the UUA National Board, mostly makes the agenda, but congregations, 25 congregations can say, hey, you got to talk about this at our meeting. And brought Green Sanctuary, and the youth caucus threw out their thing and said, we're making Green Sanctuary happen. And they did.
Oh, and Alexandra is here who has done that. Alexandria. Do you want to talk about that? Because I've never done it.
I attended GA as a youth delegate for my congregation when I was, I believe, 16. And it was just a great experience. And you got to march around, like Genevieve mentioned, with the giant inflatable palm tree. But it was really great that there were honest conversations between myself as a 16-year-old and other members of the UUA who were, in their 80s, and we could just have a conversation as though we were peers. And it was a really powerful experience, and there were a lot of really amazing conversations that happened there.
Wonderful. I'm glad you had that experience.
Thank you all for listening, for being part of the program, and thank you to Genevieve and Jennifer for sharing with us about Unitarian Universalism. And just in closing tonight, I invite all of you to check out some of our other programs. You can visit oxfordinterfaithcenter.org. If you've enjoyed our programming and would like to make a donation, as I said, we are a nonprofit organization and would gladly welcome that. So thank you all so much for being here, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.